From the City of Angels, near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Happy birthday to singer Paul Anka. He just turned 80. Great voice. Later tonight, those open lines, followed by protecting the power grid. Here's what's happening. The war against COVID-19 has changed because of the highly contagious Delta variant, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, saying that they are proposing a clearer message, mandatory vaccines for health workers, and a return to universal masking. An internal CDC document said the variant, first detected in India and now dominant across the globe, is as contagious as chickenpox and far more contagious than the common cold or flu. It can be passed on even by vaccinated people and may cause more serious disease, they say, than earlier coronavirus strains. And the new study shows the Delta COVID-19 variant produced similar amounts of virus in vaccinated and unvaccinated people if they get infected, illustrating a key motivation behind the federal guidance that now recommends most fully vaccinated Americans wear masks indoors. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, has signed an executive order prohibiting cities and other government entities in the state of Texas from enacting vaccine requirements or mask mandates to protect against the coronavirus there. The key to living, they say, past 100 may hinge on your gut health, according to a study. Centenarians have unique gut bacteria that enables them to live to a ripe old age, according to the new research. Scientists in Japan say this unique get-up through the gut fuels bile acids that protect against disease. This discovery could lead to yogurts and other probiotic foods that increase longevity. With extreme heat conditions, fire control experts tell us we may be looking at the most devastating fire season in memory, with already nearly 500,000 acres already consumed in July and the Maine months still ahead of us. Christian Wild came up with the formula using the Air National Guard's C-130 tanker units in a unique way that won an award from a state agency and later was presented to 17 governors of western states. Here he is right now with his thoughts. They continue to go out of control too, Christian.
Oh, we are in a quandary. The fire season hasn't really hit its peak at this point, and George, how many times have you and I and all your listeners watched on television a forest fire and seen a lone air tanker approach the fire, drop its retardant or water, and then disappear to get back to the base, wherever it is,
to fill up
reload?
Again. Yeah.
And when they get back, that fire has gained unrelentless control. It may take weeks or months to even get extinguished. And so I was watching that on the Colorado Waldo fire, and I got the idea and wrote a proposal and presented it, like you said, just mentioned, and it won an award, which gave me a little bit of confidence. And then Forestry in Colorado suggested I presented it to the WGA, the Western Governors Convention, and suggest at their annual meeting that they implement a pilot test program. Anyway, I got involved with Major General Frank Scoggins of the Washington Air National Guard, who's responsible for these kind of programs with the Air Force. And he sent me an email, and he said, I have read your proposal. I don't see a thing wrong with it. I want you to come up here to Fort Murray and let's talk about it. And so Major Scoggins got all behind this, and he suggested that we present it to the C-130 commanders and pilots and crews at the annual convention that they have in St. Louis, Missouri, once a year.
And these are big planes, aren't they?
Oh, they are. They are. Now, here's what I put together as a multiple state joint airborne C-130 aircraft task force.
It's like bringing the ocean to the fire.
You got it. That's a wonderful explanation. Yes. positioned, George, on the tarmacs of the Air National Guard in several western states. The suggestion has been that certain of these units be mobilized and assigned to perform as part of a combined multi-state airborne task force of 8 to 16 aircraft, and they're prepared to engage a fire or multiple fires at any one of the states, not unlike the way the Air Force would attack in a routine bombing mission in time of war. The aircraft could depart from neighboring states to rendezvous with the other units, arriving at most fires within 2 to 3 hours, and bomb that fire into
submission, my friend. That's a great idea. I hope they jump at it, Christian. Christian will also be our news guest this Sunday night talking about another issue, but great idea, Christian. His website, myheartbook.com. Well, here's an ordinance that has been passed. It's going to be signed into law in 30 days, and I think it's absolutely pathetic. The mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, has signed an ordinance that would ban homeless encampments in several public areas, with the law going into effect in 30 days. Now, the encampments will not be allowed within 500 feet of schools, parks, bridges, overpasses, libraries, and homeless shelters. The ordinance will also restrict people from sleeping in these areas, as well as sidewalks, bike lines that would stop the flow of traffic. I have seen and witnessed these little tents in these shelters under bridges and all over the place. I have witnessed people sleeping on bus benches waiting for, not buses, but that's where they were living, folks, wrapped up in blankets. When I leave the studio at night, there are people sleeping along some of the sidewalks with blankets over their heads. Before you make an ordinance to ban them, we should come up with a plan to help them, build little shelters or something. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, but that's going to be a law in 30 days in the Los Angeles area. We'll ban homeless encampments, and they'll start probably picking people up. Where are they going to put them? My gosh, you can't put them in jail. A man has been killed in Arizona. He was attacked by a bee. 5 other people injured. 1 person injured after a 100-pound beehive was disturbed in Arizona. 1 victim in the hospital right now, treated and released, was stung about 60 times. The person who died, probably even more. Several brands of dog food sold nationwide are being recalled over concerns that the products could be contaminated with mold. The pet maker is Sunshine Mills. They are recalling certain products from Triumph, Evolve, Wild Harvest, Nurture Farms, Heart to Tail Pure Bean, Elm Pet Foods. According to the FDA, if you've got a pet and you love your dog and you got this product, take it away. Earthquakes on Mars have unveiled they call them quakes there, of course, have unveiled its interior to an unprecedented degree, revealing surprising details about the red planet's crust, mantle, and core. They say the core is much bigger than they had thought. What else is going on in the skies? It's time for Kevin Randall with his weekly UFO report. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, George, how's it going?
It's going great.
I was invited to a press conference held Monday at Harvard to announce the Galileo project, which is to say that I was able
Avi Loeb, I guess?
Yes. Which is to say I was able to attend via the Internet. It was by invitation only. I got an invitation, which I thought was nice.
Cool.
And as you say, Dr. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer who announced this last spring that an alien artifact had passed through the solar system, made the announcement. For those who may not have, or who may have forgotten, it's clear that something that originated outside the solar system was detected as it flew by. Given its characteristics, Dr. Loeb determined that it was something manufactured by an alien race. Many of his colleagues disagreed with his theory. Loeb, with several other scientists, have created an international organization to search for similar objects. I'll try to get through this quote without botching it too badly. He said, "This is a transparent scientific project to advance a systematic experimental search for a cross-validated evidence of potential astroarchaeological artifacts or active technical equipment made by existing or extinct extraterrestrial technological civilizations," end quote. He tied this to the UAP report that was issued on June 25th, and he said that the recent release of the ODNI report on unidentified aerial phenomenon, the scientific community needs the determination to systematically, scientifically, and transparently look for potential evidence of extraterrestrial technological equipment. The impact of any discovery of extraterrestrial technology on science or our technology or our entire worldview would be enormous, and we have many examples of that in our history. This is going to be a new study and not one grounded in the past. In answer to my questions about the Condon Committee and if that information wasn't of value, Loeb wrote that we are focused on assembling new high-quality data and not on past data. In fact, when I interviewed him last spring, he suggested that the best sightings would be those that did not involve humans. He wanted instruments to collect the data without human interaction. He wanted to remove errors that are often generated by human perception and human bias. I thought of the MADAR project, which seemed to have a somewhat similar goal, and that would collect a variety of data without humans directly involved. MADAR is already up and running, though not as widespread as the creators had hoped. Frank Lautiker, introduced as a co-founder of the Galileo project and as a resident skeptic, said that he believed that the galaxy and the universe is teeming with life, but that it has rarely developed intelligence, and by that he seemed to suggest a life form intelligent enough that it could create a civilization. He also said that they did not want to engage in retroactive UFO cases. They were pursuing new data. And while I understand this, they made it clear that they believed that much of the old data had been poorly collected. It seemed to me that a review of the past data might be helpful in understanding the future. They said they didn't want to argue about philosophy, but wanted to collect data. They wanted to focus on objects in the sky. They believe that these visiting extrasolar objects will probably be naturally occurring, but there is still a national security element about learning the truth. And echoing something that has been said by those of us in the UFO community for years, they said it only takes one to prove alien visitation. And that's where we are tonight, George.
All right, Kev, we'll talk to you next Friday. Thanks for the report. Up next, we're going to have some fun. Marc Zicree joins us. We're going to talk about greenlighting yourself, the Twilight Zone companion, and a bunch of things that you're going to love on Coast to Coast AM. You hear that theme. It's the Twilight Zone. Marc Zicree with us. He's written and produced hundreds of hours of series of television shows, pilots, and features. He has created the Space Command Studios, author of the Twilight Zone Companion, and his latest work, Greenlighting Yourself. Marc, welcome back to the program, my friend.
Yes. Hi, George. It's great to be here.
Looking forward to us. How have you been? How's Elaine? Everybody okay?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Everyone's terrific, and it's just been amazing. I mean, we through the pandemic, we kept everyone safe. We kept all of our people in our studio employed on full salary, and we even did a 2-hour Space Command episode where our actors shot their own scenes in their own homes, so they weren't endangered at all. And it was a 2-hour bonus episode that we gave out free to our fans on my Mr. Sci-Fi YouTube channel. So it's an amazing time, you know, and I'm very grateful for everything.
Super. We'll get into a lot of that. Twilight Zone, of course, we can't forget about that. That's one of those great wonders of television that just keeps cropping up, doesn't it?
Yes. And you know, it's interesting because I heard you earlier talking about the homeless and expressing compassion and regard and empathy. And you know, Rod Serling, that was where he was coming from in Twilight Zone. You know, it's the reason we can watch them over and over again is he had a great heart and a great appreciation of people, whatever their walk of life, and he was not arrogant at all. And I think that we all need to keep our hearts open and put that into action and put that into motion and really say to ourselves, what aren't we looking at when we walk down the street? What do we turn away from? Who becomes invisible because it's too difficult to look at them and say, well, what's my part in this? What could I do to make the world better? And I think Rod Serling really took that to heart, and he said we can create a better future. He was not a pessimist. He was an optimist and a humanist, and in the best sense of that word. And that's, I think, why 60 years on, we still love the Twilight Zone.
I would have loved to have interviewed him on this show. I think he and I would have gotten along, don't you?
Yes, you would have. And, you know, I never met him. He spoke at UCLA when I had a final that day. And, boy, if I could go back in time, I would make the other choice and blow that test off. But but I've found videos of him teaching classes and so forth, and he was just amazingly. He was funny. He was warm. He made it a point to get to know the names of all of his students, and he would address them by name. I mean, he was just a great guy. The feeling of warmth you get from him when you watch Twilight Zone, that wasn't put on at all. He was absolutely that great a guy.
I still have my letter from Ray Bradbury, the late Ray Bradbury, when he wrote I Sing the Body Electric. We did an editorial in the After Dark newsletter at the time, and he simply loved it, Mark, and sent us the nicest letter.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy, and I've learned a lot from him. And you mentioned I Sing the Body Electric, and that episode starred Veronica Cartwright, and now she's in one of the series that we're starting to make, and a new show we're doing called Sweet Haven, and Veronica Cartwright's in it, and she of course was in Alien and The Birds and many other things. She's wonderful.
And our mutual buddy Billy Mooney's in one, huh?
Yes, he's in Space Command, and he's been just wonderful, and I've known him, as you know, I've known him since I was 7, and it's so much fun to work with people that you've loved since you were a kid. It's just a dream come true.
How many Twilight Zone episodes was Billy?
156. And so when I produced the Twilight Zone Blu-ray, I did 52 episode commentaries, and so now I'm going to do the rest of them. And I think it's a great thing that I'll be able to make that stuff available to the fans. It's because I walk around with all this stuff from the Twilight Zone in my head, because I interviewed over 100 people who worked on the show when I was in my early 20s and wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. So now I want to share all these memories I have of all these amazing people.
I'll always remember the story you told me one day, Mark, when Carol Serling was still alive. She let you up in the attic, and you found some unproduced Twilight Zone scripts up there.
That's right. It was amazing. I started writing the book 2 years after Rod died, and I was 22 years old and just out of college. And his house was exactly as he left it. His dog was there, an old Irish setter. And if you went back to his office behind the house, the guest house had been converted into an office by his Olympic-sized swimming pool. And there were all these science fiction paperbacks on one wall. And you'd pull them out, and inside there'd be a stamp that said property of CBS, because during the Twilight Zone, they sent him all these books to look for source material. And up in his attic, yes, it was amazing. There were all these scrapbooks of his career, and there was a box of unmade Twilight Zone scripts, and that was just a treasure trove. And now we're going to be, making some of Rod Serling's unmade scripts on a new project that I'm working on. So it's amazing. It just continues, because if you're determined to do quality, and if you're attracted to quality material, then it has a wonderful ripple effect through your life.
If I can remember, he would walk out with a cigarette in his hand, wouldn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those days are gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was very much from that Hemingway generation of guys who drank and smoked and were kind of men's men. I mean, he was in great physical shape. To look at him in photographs of him in bathing shorts, I mean, he's still, all through his life, he was doing the exercises that he'd done in the Army in World War II. But because he was a 4-pack-a-day cigarette smoker, that's really what I think caught up with him, eventually. And he died at 50, which is just so tragic.
Way young. And he used to write his scripts floating in his pool in a dictaphone, right?
Well, what he would do is he would lounge by his pool, and he would dictate the scripts into a recorder, and then his secretary would type them up, and he'd make little hand corrections. And he used to joke that he was the only writer who could write and simultaneously get a tan.
Isn't it an incredible art, though, to be able to dictate a script out of your mind just like that without sitting down at a typewriter?
Yeah, Richard Matheson, who also wrote for Twilight Zone, told me that he tried it and he couldn't do it. Rod was really quite remarkable in that way, that he could actually hold it all in his head, and I think he really loved to act out the different roles, and he talked about himself as a dialogue man. He felt that was his strength, and he could do different characters so wonderfully, and it was just, he was phenomenal.
Marc Zicree with us, and we're talking about the Twilight Zone. We'll also get into his Space Command performance, Mr. Sci-Fi Channel on YouTube, and some other things he's been working on. In our second hour with Marc, next hour, we'll take your phone calls about the Twilight Zone and other TV shows and chat with Marc about that. He's an expert, and he's one of the best. His websites are all linked up at coasttocoastam.com, and he's also on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and his books are all over the place. We'll tell you more about them when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. If you've been up to the coasttocoastam.com website, you have seen some incredible stories, and they're posted by our news editor of Coast to Coast AM, Tim Binnall. And, Tim, what do you have for us this week, my friend?
Hey, George, good to talk to you again.
You too.
I've got a fantastic story here. As soon as I started writing this one up on Wednesday, I knew we were going to be talking about it tonight on the show. This is a really eerie story. So Jake and Victoria Gorba in California, they go out to Shut-Eye Peak in Sierra National Forest. They take their 3 sons out there on a trip last week, sort of a family outing, get out into the wilderness. They stop, they're eating lunch during their little hike, and their 3-year-old son, Caden, he's captivated by something in this nearby meadow. So they ask him what he's looking at, and he says, "There's a lady over there in the meadow in a black shirt." And he goes on to say, "She needs our help, but she's dead. And she's laying face down, and she can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, of course, the boy's parents are astounded by this, and they're wondering what he's talking about. They go over, they look, there's nothing there in the meadow. But he insists that there's a woman who needs their help over there. He's adamant about it. And it's such an unsettling experience that they wind down their trip, and they decide to go home right then and there because they're all kind of just creeped out by what had just happened.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they get home, and they share this story on social media about their day visiting Shut-Eye Peak in Sierra National Forest. And lo and behold, they find out that around this time last year, a woman by the name of Sandra Hughes had vanished from the area. Now, this is the really remarkable part. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a black shirt, blue jeans, and here's the kicker, George. She had blue hair.
Ooh.
And that's precisely how the young boy described her, that she had blue hair.
Yep.
I mean, what are the odds? So it was so peculiar that I guess word reached the authorities who are investigating this missing person case, and actually they went out to the site to investigate the matter, but they couldn't find any clues or anything like that, any leads to the case. But just a really eerie, spooky story.
And it's up there at coasttocoastam.com. Tim, thanks very much. That's Tim Binnall, our news editor of the coasttocoastam.com website. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Marc Zicree. We'll take calls with Mark next hour as we talk about all things television. Mark, Space Command. I remember you just talking about that years ago on the program. Tell us about the evolution of this incredible idea.
Well, it was interesting, George, because a few years ago, all the science fiction TV shows and movies I was seeing were very dark in terms of saying basically that the future is going to be bleak. There's nothing we can do about it. You were just kind of screwed. And I remember the original Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation, too, but I grew up with the original Star Trek that inspired people, that said we can create a future if we reach across with compassion, if we come from the heart, if we have courage and honor and loyalty, that we can create a future worth living in. And I was very determined to make a show that would be that kind of show, like Star Trek had inspired me when I was a kid. And I didn't want it to just be developed as a pilot that no one would ever see or cut off its script. And so, because a number of my friends run network shows, and they said, let's take this in and let's, we can get a pilot deal. And I thought, no. I wanted to reach out to my fans and see if I could finance the pilot and perhaps more episodes myself. Well, to date, between crowdfunding and selling investment shares on Space Command, my fans have given me over $2.5 million.
Wow.
And what that's allowed me to do is open my own studio. We're working with people all around the world, and we've recorded 7 hours of Space Command so far. We started shooting the next hour. We're going to shoot 6 more hours beyond that for the first season. You can watch a lot of these episodes on my YouTube channel, Mr. Sci-Fi. We're talking to Amazon now, and we've been talking to Netflix and a number of other buyers. But my main priority now is the relationship between myself and my fans, and because of the fact that I came from major TV shows and worked for all the major studios and networks, I was able to reach out to my friends who are actors. And already in Space Command, we've got, as you mentioned, Bill Mumy, Doug Jones, who stars in Star Trek Discovery and The Shape of Water, Nichelle Nichols, who I met when I was 10 and Star Trek was on the air, Christina Moses, who stars in A Million Little Things, Armin Shimmerman from Deep Space Nine, Mira Furlan, who starred in Lost and Babylon 5. We just lost her, sadly, to West Nile virus. But she was amazing. Robert Picardo's in Space Command. Neil deGrasse Tyson is now in Space Command. Phenomenal. And so now we're building upon that to do a slate of 6 series and called the Showrunners Network. And I'm teaming with a lot of my very famous actor friends and also my friends who've created the top TV shows of the last 20 years. And so, but I have a full studio up and running with equipment, and we're building an alien spaceship. We're almost done with that. We're building 2 8-foot-tall creatures. I own 14 spacesuits. It just keeps going, and it's a dream come true. I couldn't be happier.
Has computer animation helped a lot too?
Yes, it does, but it has its own challenges. And so, for instance, in the first 2 hours of Space Command, the 2-hour pilot, we have 1,800 visual effects shots, which is insane. It's like Star Wars doesn't have that many. For the next 2-hour episode that we're in post-production on now, that will have a lot more of what are called practical effects. That's why we're building the alien spaceship. That's why we're building the 2 8-foot-tall creatures, so that we aren't as reliant on visual effects. So what you try to do is find the balance, but mainly you have to tell a human story with characters that people care about. And the effects are wonderful, and they have to be good, of course, and the production design has to be good. But at heart, it's about people you care about, and that's always what's going to make something last and affect people and move people and entertain them.
And I got to tell you, Mark, I've met a lot of people in Hollywood since I've been out here. You're one of the nicest guys I've ever met. You deserve this. You really do.
Thank you. Well, it's the love of a good woman. Elaine and I are writing and directing and producing together, and we just celebrated our 44th anniversary.
No way.
So, yeah.
You're only 32 years old.
Yes, that's a paradox, isn't it? And but the funny thing is, she met me when I was in college, and so God knows what I'd be like if not for Elaine.
Well, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you. She's the best part of every day, and I couldn't be more lucky.
Tell us about the evolution of the Mr. Sci-Fi channel on YouTube.
Yeah, well, that was really interesting, George. I was having lunch a couple of years ago with my friend Glenn Mazzaro, who was the showrunner on Walking Dead, and we were just talking science fiction like you and I are talking now. And he said, you know so much about science fiction, you should have your own YouTube channel. So I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. So I went on YouTube and found out how one does that, and I just started, talking about science fiction and sharing what I was working on, like Space Command, or I'd talk about, Twilight Zone and stories that Ray Bradbury had told me, or that I'd heard from Rod Serling's, from my research, and so and I really didn't do much to promote it, but now I've got millions of hits. I'm closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and it's absolutely free content. I mean, I talk about, any aspect of science fiction that I want to talk about, and then also I put my Space Command episodes up there and all sorts of stuff. So it's just a cornucopia. It's really, really fun. I have a great time doing it.
We're going to take calls next hour with Mark about the Twilight Zone and other TV shows, so get ready to jump on board. Your latest work is called Greenlighting Yourself. Tell me about that.
Well, yes, and I think, George, for many years I've run this roundtable of writers and directors and actors and producers, and during the pandemic we've been on Zoom, but it's thousands of members, and it was just something I created and run for free. There are no dues. It's basically just to give people a supportive place in Hollywood, even if they're not in Hollywood, the town. It's just to basically create a showbiz industry that has humanity at its core and kindness. And so many people get so defeated by the arrogance of Hollywood, or they can't get an agent, or they can't get a manager, or they can't get anyone to read their script. And what I've been applying the last few years in building my own studio and creating Space Command and all of these things I've been doing, I thought nobody teaches that. There's no book you can get on how you can basically greenlight yourself. That now, thanks to the internet and thanks to computers and thanks to the fact that we all have video cameras, high-quality video cameras in our pocket, the barriers, it's no longer up to the studios or the networks or the major publishing houses what gets out to the world. You can reach millions of people if you just have something that people will find interesting. And so I wanted to share step by step what I had done, and also a number of my friends. Fortunately, J.J. Abrams and Neil Gaiman and Guillermo del Toro and, Ray Bradbury, of course, they all have told me stories that were about how they built their careers and how they recovered from failure and how they, were supported and mentored by others. And fortunately, and my friend Ron Moore, who runs For All Mankind, the TV show on Apple now, they were all kind enough when I reached out and said, you told me this great story about your career privately, but can I share it with my readers? And they all said yes, and it was just great. And so this is sort of like everything I've learned over 40 years of my career. I've been a professional writer since I was 19, and it's not a mystery. But the problem is that so many people are told, well, you've got to have a great script, or you need an agent in order to make it, and none of that is true. You just need to say, what do I want to share with the world? What comes from my heart? And it's a conversation between you and the world, as you know, because people can certainly understand. I mean, the reason you're successful, George, is because you're authentic, and people can listen to the show and they know what you're passionate about and they know who you are. And what people have to understand, you don't have to hide who you are to succeed as an artist. You have to be authentic and honest and straightforward, and people will get that. And if you come from passion and enthusiasm and honesty and genuine quality, people will respond.
Ray Bradbury passed away 9 years ago at the age of 91. Tell us a little bit about him. He was one of a kind.
He was phenomenal. I longed for him to be my friend and mentor for many, many years, decades. And I'd given up on that. And then one day he came across something I'd created, and he loved it, and he called me, and he said, you must come to the house. And I came, and we just hit it off. And so then for over 10 years, once a month, I would go to his house, and we'd just sit and talk about career and life and art, and he'd invite me to these plays. He was putting on plays of his work at that point, and I always, of course, brought a book for him to sign, one of his books, and he was so wonderful. And the interesting thing is that I'd heard that he and Rod Serling had a falling out, and that was why he only wrote one episode of Twilight Zone. He was originally going to be one of the major writers on the show, and neither he nor Rod would talk about it publicly. And in fact, when I tried to interview him for the Twilight Zone companion, he declined. And finally, when we became very close friends, I said, okay, Ray, tell me what happened between you and Rod. And he told me. And so I have a video on Mr. Sci-Fi where I say, okay, I'm going to tell you what the story that Ray told me. And it's an amazing story. It takes 30 minutes for me to tell it. And it's on my Mr. Sci-Fi channel. But he basically talked about how basically neither one of them was at fault. It was just kind of like where they came to a parting of the ways. But Twilight Zone would not have been what it was without Ray Bradbury, because his three protégés, Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, and George Clayton Johnson, formed the core of the writing team on Twilight Zone, and that was thanks to Ray. And
they were unable, Rod and Ray, to get together, huh, at the end?
They just had a falling out. It was, I go into it in detail, but it was mainly just that it was just kind of cross purposes. Rod was incredibly busy, and so certain things he'd said to Ray kind of fell through the cracks. It was like falling out that anyone can have. They were both wonderful people, and I'm very, very glad that I got to get to know Ray so well, and he trusted me with that story. And my God, there were so many pieces of advice he gave me that were invaluable, and they're in the Greenlighting Yourself book. I talk about that at length in the book.
Good for you. And people can get this book now? Is it out?
It's not out yet. I've sent the manuscript to my publisher, Silman James. It'll be out, in a few months. And so if people just kind of, go on to Amazon or whatever, and, they'll be able to find it ultimately. And I think they'll really benefit from it.
What's your favorite Twilight Zone episode?
Well, my favorite is Walking Distance, because that's about a man who goes back into the past of his childhood to try to reclaim that childhood. And it was it was Rod Serling's personal favorite, because during the war, he was a paratrooper, and even when the war was winding down, his father died very suddenly of a heart attack at age 52, and he wanted to go home to the funeral. He was overseas, and the Army wouldn't let him go, the Army Air Corps, and so he never got to say goodbye to his dad. And so that episode really is about him going back home and finally being able to say goodbye to his father. And so it was very personal for Rod, and just an amazing piece of writing. I mean, there's so many great Twilight Zone episodes. I mean, you can't really go wrong if you say the one with Burgess Meredith, where he's the last man on Earth, or Howling Man, or
To Serve Man.
any of them. Stop at Willoughby. It's just
I loved them all.
Riches.
To Serve Man, that was a classic too.
That's a great episode, absolutely, and that was written by one of my teachers. Damon Knight wrote the short story that episode was based on, and he was my teacher. And when I was 19 years old, he bought my first short story. So.
And they all had that ending, that really special ending, didn't they?
Yes. And Rod would say that if he knew the ending, he knew he was okay. But he said he had so many ideas where he could get the beginning and the middle and could not come up with the ending, and those never, of course, got on the air. But if he had the ending, he knew where he was going, and he could write incredibly fast. When he did The Hitchhiker, the episode with Inger Stevens, which was an adaptation of a radio play.
Going My Way.
Yeah, he wrote that episode in 8 hours.
Wow.
Episode.
That's
he
amazing.
Was incredibly fast.
Mark, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and chat more with you and take phone calls in our final hour just ahead on Coast to Coast AM.